And I've had a complicated trajectory, making documentaries, making films in Britain, then made one in France. And I've reached a certain age where I feel like going back to something really familiar, not just geographically, but familiar from my childhood. So going back to Poland in the 60s, it's like going back to when I was 5. It also something to do with my, kids growing up, leaving home, and being free to do whatever I want. And I suddenly felt this urge to make a film in Poland about the period that interests me, and also to make a film that has absolutely no commercial pressure on it, because making a film in Polish is already like you already cut yourself off from like 95% of the market, and so there's no kind of hope anyway. You can just really do what you want to do. So I wanted to make a film where I can cast how I want, shoot how I want, and with no sense of any kind of pressure. But also it's but the Poland in the film is also slightly like imagined Poland. It's the Poland which I cherish somehow, apart from remembering it vividly, but vaguely. It's also Poland which I find most exciting, the idea of which I find most exciting. Poland of the early 60s, where the disasters of war, the trauma of war with Stalinism were all kind of fading slightly, and kind of exciting new things were happening in music and just general attitudes, in arts generally. But it often happens in countries where the terror and censorship are not taken away but lessened, and suddenly the little bit of freedom that there is grabbed with great voraciousness, and great life comes about. Great life in music and arts, and so Poland was an exciting place at the time, and just but by the end of the 60s, or even then, I mean, these songs that are in the film, I mean, I kind of sang them all the time, or I was surrounded by them. They're really cool. I could tell that there's kind of fun things happening. There was a huge explosion of talent in the late 50s, early 60s. But the 60s generally, I mean, I became kind of conscious more or less of the world in the late 60s, where there's a lot of pop and rock music that came from across from England, from the States. There was a radio station that played them, the Radio 3. There was one particular program that I listened to a lot. So Poland was actually the threshold of pop culture, rock culture in Eastern Europe. It was the country which had the most porous borders, where everybody kind of was aware of what was going on in the West, and jazz and rock. It was known as the most fun barrack in the communist camp. And a lot of people in other communist countries at the time, especially in Russia, learned Polish to read Polish newspapers and magazines, which were much more open and talked about stuff that wasn't kind of contaminated by ideology. So it was a very alive place. Even if today people, or the right especially, kind of just demonize communist Poland full stop, but actually communism was Polish communism, or communism in general in Eastern Europe was an oppressive and horrible regime. But life went on, and life in the 60s was actually much more vibrant than it is today. In this case, it started out with the idea of a nun, or novice nun, who discovers that she's got Jewish origins. But it was a kind of intellectual idea to start with. I just thought it was kind of an interesting way of dealing with the whole idea of faith, of Christianity, Christianity being something more than a kind of tribal markings that Polish church has kind of reduced it to. So for me, it was a kind of interesting starting point, but it was a bit too intellectual, and the story that I started writing then became a little bit mechanical, because they didn't really have a bigger heart. It didn't have there wasn't enough, basically. And then when I put that story together with a young nun, with the story of the communist state prosecutor, former communist state prosecutor, who has now fallen on hard times, and this kind of cynical, lively, complicated woman, when I put these two figures together, suddenly some spark occurred, and a kind of idea of a road movie emerged. And the third thing that made me want to do this film was the landscape, the world of 62 with its locations, with its atmosphere, kind of melancholy but vibrant, kind of empty but full of sounds just out of shot, full of new energies. So when I put two characters and a landscape together, I kind of knew I had a film, and then it was just a matter of kind of working through it and getting these two characters to interact, to push each other on. The good thing is that both of them had faith, had different sort of faith, and this faith was challenged. One faith was in something that's transcendental and not touchable, and the other one was sort of connected to history, and history is always a disappointment, so it was a more fragile faith. In the past, with my fictions, as opposed to documentaries, but in my fictions I try to steer clear of history, because I always worried that if you deal with a historical subject or landscape or place and time and place, you end up illustrating things, you end up kind of explaining the context, which is always bad news for cinema and bad news for dialogues, because they have to convey a lot of information. Or you end up using characters as illustrations or symbols of something. So that always stopped me from dealing with history. But at this point in my development, I just decided not to worry about it and not to try and explain history, not to worry about characters being symbolic, just to create really interesting characters that have kind of universal resonance, and to make a film about kind of universal things, and faith, identity, love, death, all that kind of stuff, and just using a concrete historical moment as a starting point, and not to worry about having to explain, to illustrate anything. I mean, there have been Polish films that dealt with this issue as an issue, and books, so it's. I don't think cinema is a good place for debates, I think it's. If I wanted to deal with this issue, I would write a book or possibly do some research first. Whereas I think, in this case, I just wanted the film to have a kind of life of its own and to kind of float above the earth a little. But of course, the context is deeply historical, and it's great that it kind of resonates in many ways. But it definitely is not it's not some kind of settling of accounts or attempt to explain or to accuse or anything, no. Well, Agata Kulesza, who plays Wanda, is a very well-known in Poland now, a theatre actress, like a virtuoso of acting, she's brilliant in theatre. I saw her in a play which bowled me over. Her performance was great. And a wonderful kind of energetic, intelligent woman who really got into the Wanda character, did a lot of research, and we did together. But she really got deep into that character, and she's a bit of a method actress, while being light on her feet. She doesn't take herself too seriously either, which was very good. The other one, Agata Trzebuchowska, is not an actress at all. She's a student who we met in a cafe when she was just sitting reading a book, and she never wanted to act, and she was curious to come along to the auditions because she'd seen some of my films and was just kind of curious to meet me, but didn't in the least want to be an actress or to act in this film. I convinced her to try it out just for one film.
It's quite unusual.
Yeah, unusual, but there was something totally right about her. I mean, there was something, because I looked at a lot of young actresses for the part who were either young actresses or drama students, and I couldn't find anyone who I would totally believe was this woman. Whereas Agata Trzebuchowska had this kind of real calm and strength about her, and no histrionics, not a histrionic bone in her body. She had a kind of face that was really straight and childlike, and clearly she was thinking a lot and kind of observing and drawing conclusions all the time, but with this kind of childish face, sort of kind of wise spirit with a child's face, which is kind of perfect. And also her face didn't do any gymnastics, she didn't do any grimaces, she just doesn't have that. Like most of us living in society, we always pull faces and, smile or just try and ingratiate ourselves or try to seduce, whereas she just didn't have it, you know. So she had these kind of basic qualities of Ida, you know, Ida who grew up away from society in a kind of closed world where you don't communicate with your face. So she was right in that sense. But what was also great was that she's incredibly principled, young Agata Trzebuchowska. She immediately told me that she was an atheist. She had nothing to do with religion. She didn't get this character at all. And she was a kind of strong feminist, which in Poland, you know, is not so common. And very, very principled and calm about her principles, you know. So paradoxically, she was much closer to the religious character of Ida than all these potential actresses who came to screenings, to castings, to auditions, who kind of assured me that they always wanted to become a nun, or you know, they were believing in God. And there's something completely uncompromising about Agata Trzebuchowska, you know, which made me realize she's the woman. Agata Kulesza, you know, the older actress, she's not that kind of actress, you know. She's not an attention-seeking actress, you know. She's got enough control, and she realized what the situation was. She gave a lot of space to the young Agata. She helped her with her performance. You know, she was always trying to kind of feed off her and you know, create a right sort of balance. It was a real luxury working with these two. It was challenging because we did everything in one take, in one shot. You know, there was no coverage, there's no cutting, so both of them had to be good at the same time, which is not easy. There was no way we could cut our way out of trouble afterwards because there was no, you know, shots to do it with. But that was a really good influence on the process. You know, everyone felt that this is the shot, this is the framing, this is the moment. There was a kind of electricity on the set which helped everyone to focus and made everything quite calm and not industrial. You know, there wasn't this kind of business of moving lights around and moving the camera around and try this way, try that way. It was more try this way, try that way happened in rehearsals, but once we found, you know, set up the shot and we created the atmosphere, the mood, you know, then everyone was kind of firing, which was great. The guiding principles was, at the heart of it, was to make a film that's with a narrative, and it's quite a powerful story when you think of it, but not to just make a film that's a story, but also a film that's a bit of a meditation. So I didn't want a film that's just kind of, you know, that works on what happens next principle, but more like every moment is a thing in itself. And I wanted the audience to kind of get, I mean, those who get involved with that kind of film, I mean, I'm sure most audiences will steer clear, but people who can deal with this kind of film, I wanted them to enter the world which is created and to kind of stay there and to be there in the moment, you know, not to think what happens next in the story, but to really experience each moment as a thing in itself. So I wanted every scene to be done in one shot, for it to be photographic. In other words, you know, the film to be not just a sequence of shots that add up to a sequence, but just like every moment is just something to contemplate. And there is a kind of underlying narrative and a drama, but I want people to just kind of watch the moment, you know, like it's like a meditation. And I wanted it to not to spell anything out, to leave things to the imagination all the time, not to show too much, you know, not to move the camera to show what's left or right, not to have reverse shots or close-ups that explain. I wanted to train the viewer from the very beginning to really look and to find things and to be affected by things by entering the world of the film, not to drag them and to force them to look at this and kind of terrorize them. It was more like, you know, contemplate. And I wanted to suggest as much as possible by showing as little as possible, not to have too many elements in the shot, not to create this kind of fake realism, which I hate in cinema, you know, with a lot of extras doing stuff and camera moves just because, or is handheld, because that's sort of more lifelike, you know. I just didn't want to do that. And I wanted there not to be too much sound, but the sounds that there are kind of somehow resonant. you know, basically to limit things, and also in dialogue, not to give too much information. I mean, and hopefully people will fill in the gaps, you know, and because people have to fill in the gaps in information and in the images and what happens around, I think films like that have a chance to kind of stay more in the imagination after they finish. I immediately imagined it in black and white when writing. It felt like, partly it was to do with the fact that I imagined that world, or I remember that world in black and white, and not just black and white, but in that kind of format, 4:3. But also because I felt black and white make things a little bit, you know, takes it out of the kind of fake realism, you know. Immediately it becomes a little bit out of its time, you know, so at the same time it's more contemporary, like 60s look, but also it becomes a little bit more timeless or removed from time. So you kind of look at it with different eyes. But also it helped me just eliminating color, you know, was also part of that thing to eliminate too many things, you know, just to have some elemental basic things that kind of reverberate, and there's not too many distractions or attractions. You know? I didn't think of it like that. It wasn't an intellectual, it was more like an intuitive thing to at some point, when I was doing rehearsals with camera, you know, the format of the film, the 4:3, is very specific. It's very good for portraits and faces and double portraits. It's great. For landscape, it's a bit limiting, you know. So at some point, you know, I was doing like a wider shot, and I had these two figures block the whole shot, and there's absolutely, you know, it felt really like there's no landscape at all. So I just tried to tilt the camera up and to have more air. And it was a purely kind of, let's see what happens kind of thing. And then it just felt really good. It felt right. You know, they look kind of, you know, I had them cut off here and there was some kind of space above them. It just felt like there's something good happened, you know, like this, and I didn't intellectualize it, just felt more interesting. And then because that worked, I kept going, especially in the wide shots, you know, just like there's more space above. And it was purely intuitive, you know, and then of course, if people see, if it resonates like that, of course, you know, I did notice, you know, when I tried it out, that they look kind of lost in space, you know, that there's a, you know, usually when you have like a wide, you know, widescreen or wider formats, you know, and people can get lost in landscape horizontally. And here they were kind of lost vertically, and there was something good about that. The peculiarity of this film is that the DP I was preparing the film with dropped out, you know. So I rang all the DPs I knew. Nobody was free at a short notice, so I ended up shooting with the camera operator who'd never DP'd a film before, who was a kind of this young guy. He was 29 actually, but he looked 19, so it was a bit scary. And but he was the only chance. But I could see he's got good energy, and you know, I hadn't spoken to him much, but he was there, and it worked brilliantly. You know? I mean, he did great work, and above all, he wasn't afraid for his reputation. You know, he was like, I said, let's frame like this, you know, like this, and he was, yeah, why not? Or even he even added his own kind of eccentricities. You know, he was totally uninhibited, which was great. You know, he had absolutely no track record or reputation to defend, and he had a really good energy. He was young. He was so excited to be doing his debut unexpectedly. And I'd never seen anything he'd done before. It was like never happened. In fact, the whole crew I worked with, I'd never worked with before. Because somebody said to me, a friend of mine said, "Oh, it's too formal, it's too aesthetic, this film." I said, "You know, it's so impersonal." I said, "I don't know." But I was reminded of what T.S. Eliot once said about poetry. He said something like, in his lecture about poetry, he said something, it was a lecture about tradition and individual voice. That was the title of the lecture. He said something like, poetry is not turning loose of emotion. In fact, it's the suppression of emotion. But only people who have emotion can do that. So it's not about kind of like, oh, here's emotion, you know, here's close-ups, people are emoting, crying, cameras moving. I think it's much more emotion, if there's real emotion, to actually diffuse it, you know, and hide it, and then it'll still hit you if you are you know, if you can watch films in a certain way. You know.